Well, that's better. Now that I have sound, I can actually get started. I decided to open the video that way as a nod to this project here I'm going to be working on. This is a new model kit from XPlus Models of the robot from the movie Metropolis. If you're not familiar with Metropolis, although I'm sure many of you are, it is a silent movie from the mid-1920s. It's considered a groundbreaking science fiction film. I first learned about the movie many years ago from Starlog magazine. In fact, I learned a lot about science fiction through that magazine. And I got to see the movie with my son a few years ago, and it is a fascinating watch. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. Recently, I was on the Culttvman website, just happened to be looking for some stuff to pre-order. I hit the new releases tab and saw that this model was now available for shipping. I wasn't even aware they were making a model kit of it. So I was really excited to see it, and I decided to order it right away, and I'm ready to get started here with the build. So before we begin, let's take a peek inside the box. Well, there's not much to the instructions here. It is a one-page set of instructions, just front and back side here. And it begins by showing you how the two halves are going to go together of the torso, arms, and legs. And showing you how it looks when it's assembled this way. Showing you some of the different accessories that you're putting onto the robot here. And the assembly of the chair and stand. The back side of the instructions, or at least the opposite side, shows what the model is supposed to look like when it's completed. So I don't think this is going to take very long to assemble. Let's take a look at the actual parts. And what we have here are simply the parts for the chair and stand. It has the Metropolis logo on here. And there are other parts for the stand contained in this bag. And then we have these sprues here, which are made of clear parts, and these actually are pieces that are going to go onto the stand. You can see they are placed all along the perimeter of the stand here. Well, let's talk about painting here. I initially thought of painting her gold. Through the years, I'd seen some renderings of Maria, and also we know that she served as inspiration for design of C-3PO. I just assumed she was gold, and in fact you saw even the model is molded in gold, but apparently she wasn't. When I posted on Facebook that I was working on this project and that I intended on painting Maria with this Vallejo liquid gold, it was quickly pointed out to me by several modelers that that is not the case, that Maria was really a mix of some metallic colors and turns out to be kind of like a bronzish silver or warmer silver tone. In fact, modeler Matt Lawrence posted an article, which I will share the link with you down below. It talks about a group that constructed a full replica of Maria, and they did a lot of research, including what color the original prop was, and that is in fact the case. So I decided to come up with a mix then of liquid gold and liquid silver, and I'm starting off then with about I'd say about an 80-20 mix for the color, and I think that's going to work well, but we'll see if I have to modify that a little further. Alright, let's go ahead and get started with Maria from Metropolis. Well, all the parts now have been primed with Stynylres's gray primer, and I do plan on spraying on a gloss black before spraying on any metallic color. However, I do think it'd be best to start putting some of this together and dry fitting some of these pieces just to kind of see how things come along before applying any metallic color or finish. This way I can avoid any possible damage to that finish as I'm handling these parts. Well, I did put the two halves together. As you can see, not very difficult to assemble, and there is a seam that you don't have to worry about because there are other parts that will slide on here and will conceal that seam. I did want to draw your attention to this little note here. It suggests to open up these little holes here. These are the holes that these pieces to slide into, and I'll hold them in place. And I wanted to share this tool here that I recently purchased off of this website called mechwarehouse.com. Now, I came across this tool on a video, and I'll post a link to that video below. The modeler was using this tool to clear away some surface imperfections from a 3D printed model that she had done. And so I've been looking for some time to have a powered handheld tool that would be more convenient to use than a Dremel. A Dremel's great for a lot of things, but it's a bit overkill for some situations that I run into. And so I've always wanted something that will spin at a lower speed, not melt the plastic, and this is going to work out great. It comes with a sanding tool but I have ordered some other attachments for this as well. It can be a little more precise than this for sanding, but you can also put in a drill bit. Now, the one thing about putting in bits, however, is that you have two little screws on each side that use an Allen wrench. It's provided for, and you have to kind of carefully screw in your bit so that it's as centered as possible. And so I'm not sure if this would be great for precise drilling, but for this purpose it worked out great. As you can see, I just used it just to gently open up the holes there. And you can see once the holes are opened up, the parts do easily slide on. I'm not sure how hard they would have been to slide on without doing this, but it really made it easy. So I can think of a number of circumstances in the past where I've had parts that had to slide together in a similar fashion, and it would have been nice to have a tool like this. So I think this is going to be really good to have. If you are interested in it, it's a DSPAIE, at least that's the brand name, and you are able to vary the speeds as well. This again was purchased at mechwarehouse.com. There are a couple sources I found online, but this is a really cool website, especially if you are into building Gundams. There are a lot of cool things they've got there for that, but certainly you can use a lot of their tools for other things as well. Alright, let's go ahead and move on. Well, as you can see, I moved on to the legs. As I was dry fitting these pieces together, I concluded that it would be easier to assemble all this and then attach the legs. I think you just have better access doing that as you're trying to piece these together, and this way I can paint them and then attach them. I was just worried about, as I work through here, that I would mess up the finish and then having to repaint stuff, which you can always do, obviously, but with how close these pieces have to fit together, I think it just provides better access to do it this way. So I did snip off these pins that slide into these openings, which is fine because there's more than enough surface area to allow for the glue to adhere properly. Now let's talk about the seams. Lou Delmaso posted his video yesterday, and he did a great job with his build. I'll post the link down below. He's provided a lot of good advice as always, but one of the things he did talk about are some of these seams that need to be addressed. Now there are a number of them that are part of the design, like on this side, but unfortunately this is not one of them. This seam needs to be taken care of, and the challenge that you have here are these areas in between this detailing here. And you got to be very careful if using a sanding stick like I was doing. I started to create these heavy gouges there, so you just have to be careful not to do that. I was able to sand this and smooth it away, so I'm working real hard to address this as best I can. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get all of it, but getting close here to applying some putty, and obviously need to do it on this side as well. The other seam that will need to be addressed is the upper arm here. There's two pieces that come together, and I'll have to sand that as well. So the other thing I want to make note of is that the parts slide together with tubes on one side, pins on the other. So they have to slide into these tubes here, and it has helped to use this tool. As you can see, that's what I'm doing here, to open up the tubes, and by doing so you'll find the parts will slide together much easier. Now if you don't want to do that, the other thing that you can do is what Lou did, and that is to cut these shorter, and that way you don't have so much plastic having to slide through those tubes. The next step now was to address those seams, and I decided to use epoxy sculpt putty for this. I chose this option because the seam is rather heavy. At least I had a real challenge trying to sand them and prep for putty application. I've become comfortable using this stuff, and what I like about it is that you can easily use sculpting tools along with water to shape and mold it. I just didn't think I'd have good luck with regular model putty and would end up having to reapply the stuff over and over again. Once I was done with applying the epoxy sculpt, I left it out in the sun to dry for most of the day. Once it was cured, I proceeded with sanding. As mentioned, the hardest to reach places are in between these areas here, and I ended up cutting strips of sandpaper, securing the model to a vise while I worked at them. And this is how they ended up, and I can't say I'm 100% satisfied, but I have been at it for a while, and I've decided just to move on. If there ever was an inconvenient place to put a seam, this would take the cake for sure. But I think overall it turned out okay. Alright, well I'm ready to move on now, and it should go pretty quick from here. Next up is to apply a gloss coat to the exterior parts. I did apply gunmetal to the inner body here because some of it will be exposed in places, and I thought gunmetal would be a good choice for the color that would peek through. And I did apply some gunmetal along here as well. I do have to touch up a couple places. I forgot to mask this off when I reapplied the primer. Well, another tool that I recently got along with the drill that I showed you there, that sander, is this here. I got this on Amazon, and this is something I'm meaning to get for quite some time. These are these clips that you can use to hold onto your pieces while you're spraying them. These in particular are cushioned with these rubber ends. So I found these on Amazon. I'll put the link down below, and it ran $12.99 for a set. So I'm going to go ahead and spray these with gloss black, and I'll be right back. Okay, well that worked out great. All the pieces are black now. Let's move forward now with the assembly of the legs. I'm going to go ahead and do the legs first and the torso last. Well, as you can see, I ended up applying the silver paint after all. As I was assembling the leg, all the pieces were sliding on pretty well, so I don't think I'll have any issues with assembly now. So I didn't see any advantage to waiting, and as you can see, airbrushing was easy. The paint went on quite smooth and dried to a beautiful finish. I'm not sure if you've tried these liquid paints from Vallejo, but they do dry to a nice shiny finish. Now the color looks good. I just wish it was a little bit more gold. So what I may end up doing is very lightly airbrushing on some of the liquid gold at the very, very end. But it is actually looking pretty nice. Well, as you can see, the legs are now completed. I'm going to set them aside and continue working on the upper body. Now, when you assemble this model kit, you do begin by putting together the two halves of the inner body. And then that is followed by attaching the upper arm pieces, which in this case actually works out well because we have seams to fill in on those pieces. And what's nice about doing it this way is I can work on all this stuff without having any other pieces around that I could potentially damage. So I'm well underway in the process of doing this now, and what I've done is I actually used super glue for the seams out here because they weren't too heavy, and I've seen other people use super glue for seam work, and I wanted to try it, and it worked out pretty well on the outside seams. Now, I was going to do the same thing, or at least I had planned on doing the same thing with the inner seams, and really wasn't going to spend too much time on those because you can't see them a whole lot, but you can see them at certain angles here, so I wanted to at least try to fill them in somewhat anyway. And the super glue didn't work quite as well. The seam appeared to be a bit heavier there, so what I did in addition is I added in some putty, and I'm waiting for that to dry. So once that is done, I'll finish sanding those, and then I'm going to repaint this black before reapplying the silver. So proceeding on with adding the front torso now, followed by the back, and I've decided to go ahead and put on gloves for the rest of this just so I don't get any oils from my skin onto the painted surfaces here. Now the next step is to add the face and the helmet, and what's interesting about the face is that the eyes were actually painted in. If you look at this picture from that article that I mentioned that Matt Lawrence had posted, it does mention that the eyes were colored in white, and it does mention that the lids were also enhanced with a darker gray color. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in the eyes with a light gray, and I'm not sure about enhancing anything around that with a darker gray. Let me start with the eyes first and we'll see. Okay, well the head's attached, we got the helmet, eyes are painted, hands are on, forearms and so forth. So I'm ready to move through the final assembly now, and what I have left to do are to add all these little parts and pieces here all along the top. So rather than recording that, I'm going to finish this up and save her for the final reveal. Next, I move on to the stand. Alright, so these are the pieces to the stand. Let me go through them real quick. It's pretty simple. We've got this part of the base here. This is the primary base, if you will. And this is what the chair is going to sit on, as well as Maria is going to be standing here. And the chair, which comes in two parts, I've already put the back on, just slides onto this, like so. Now these are these feet that will mount along the bottom here, as well as here. Now let's talk about lighting. You know, if you don't want to do any lighting, I think you'd be perfectly fine. It really doesn't doesn't really need it, but I'm going to go ahead and add something a little extra here. What Lou did with his, if you watched his video, he put spotlights. That's initially what I had in mind to do as well. But take a look at this picture. You'll notice now that light is splashing out from underneath the chair and the extended base. And let me also draw your attention to one of those feet. Let me zoom in here, and you'll notice that the feet are clear. So that's the look I'm going to go for. I think that can be accomplished by just mounting some SMDs along here. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to put any other lighting underneath this one here. And the battery can easily be placed into here and accessible by either lifting up the chair or maybe creating an opening here. I think that's what I'm going to do, is keep it simple and just lift up the chair to change the battery out. But I'll give that some extra thought there. And then, of course, the feet I'm going to leave clear, like I saw in the picture. As for the color, I'm going to use black. Lou went for a marble effect, which I thought looked pretty nice. I tried looking at various pictures I could pull up online, but of course the film is in black and white and was made in the 1920s, so you don't really have access to good resolution pictures. But the chair does look dark. The floor looks black for sure. But I think to make it simple, I'm just going to paint everything black. Alright, well, you can see now the chair and stand have been painted black. But, you know, after applying the black paint, I was just looking at it thinking how boring it looked. And so I was trying to think of something to do to give it something a little extra. And what I decided on doing was to apply a very light mist of this obsidian color. And it worked out real well. I just thinned it down, put it in my airbrush, held the airbrush at a distance, and just lightly misted over a coating of this stuff. And let me zoom in here for you. So when you step in a little closer, you can see it retains the black color, but it also has a little bit of a shine to it there. Okay, the other thing I wanted to show you here is I added in some lights here. So we have 2 SMDs here and 2 SMDs on the side. And let's go ahead and do a light test. Let me go ahead and hook up a battery. And there you go. Now bear in mind the camera is washing this out a bit. It's not quite as pronounced as you see on camera there. It's a little more subtle, but it really is what I was looking for there with the light coming underneath the chair. And just a look at the 4 cool white Mega SMDs that I got from ebondesigns.com. And as you can see, I just used super glue to secure them in place. Well, definitely in the final stretch here, I wanted just to show you this before I wrap everything up. I was trying to think of a way to be able to access that battery on this back side here, and at first I thought it would be easy to pull on and off the chair, but that's not going to be so easy to do, and in fact this might leave it open to damage Maria as she's standing there as I'm pulling on and off that chair. So I decided to play around with this back side here, and what I did was I snipped off the pins that slide into the tubes on this side, and then I also snipped off the pins here, and decided to secure it all with magnets. So I first glued down these 4 magnets, and once they were secure I placed a drop of black paint on each of them, and that way when I placed this on here it made markings on this side to tell me where to put down the magnets. So it worked out well. So you can see it hooks in pretty easily, and I happen to have this piece here in my parts drawer. I'm not sure where it goes to, but it's going to function as a little handle. Allows me to easily pull that off. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and secure the battery now that that's all taken care of, and I will show you the completed project in just a second. Alright, so here we have now the completed Robot Maria from Metropolis. This is a 1/8 scale kit from XPlus Models. When completed, the figure itself measures nearly 9 inches in height, and the base adds another 2. There are a few quirks about the kit overall, but I have to say it makes a pretty impressive replica of the robot. I'll give you a brief summary of some points to look for in my final comments of the video. In the meantime, let's do a quick review of the build. Assembly for the most part was pretty straightforward, but I deviated a bit from the instructions with piecing things together. I started with the upper body as suggested, but decided on assembling the legs separately before attaching them to the main body. This proved to be helpful and provided better access to the exterior parts when painting. One thing the instruction sheet advises to do is to open up the holes that are provided for attaching exterior parts to the inner body, and that is something I would highly recommend as well. Taking the time to do so allows the parts to slide together with ease and helps to make sure there are no gaps between the halves of each section. The last phase of assembly involved attaching the small pieces in detail along the head and upper body, which wasn't too complicated, but you definitely have to be careful. Metallic paint is not very forgiving if you accidentally get glue on it, and this unfortunately occurred a couple of times for me. I'll mention more advice about that shortly. And as for painting, I at first had in mind to paint the figure gold, but fellow modelers noted that the robot was in fact a warm silver color instead. My choice here was to combine Vallejo's liquid silver and gold, starting with an 80-20 mix. I think it looked okay, but I decided to take that base color and mix in just a little bit more gold, which was lightly sprayed on after she was completely assembled. And I really like the way the color turned out in the end. My recommendation would be to start off with a 70-30 mix and see if you like it. And if you decide on making it warmer, I think doing what I did with mixing in more of the gold to the base color is a good approach. The Vallejo paints were easy to work with and are alcohol-based, so they do dry quickly. Just remember to stick to 90% alcohol when cleaning your airbrush afterwards, and I would do it as quickly as you can. One other note is that I did paint the eyes with a light gray, which I'd also recommend doing. Based on the articles that I've recently seen on Facebook about Maria, the eyes were in fact painted in. To do this, I chose a light gray rather than a white so that they wouldn't be too conspicuous, and I think it worked well. And lastly, the base was very easy to assemble. I lit it with 4 cool white SMDs from evandesigns.com. They're powered by a 9-volt battery, which was easy to conceal inside the chair, and is turned on by a push switch, also from Evan Designs. The switch was easy to mount onto the backplate of the chair. One other thing to note is that I also like the way the figure is posed. Rather than just standing straight, the figure is posed with the left leg slightly bent, making it look like it's ready to take its first step forward. So overall, I think this makes a great replica that I think any fan would be happy with. I can't say it's 100% accurate, but it looks pretty close to me. And just for fun, I decided to take some black and white shots, and as you can see, it looks incredibly similar to the original prop. Well, just a few points to go over with you. I made a short list of things that you can keep in mind if you are interested in building this model kit. Hopefully you'll find these helpful. The first point are the way that these parts are attached to the trees. Unfortunately, the way they're attached to those sprues, man, there's a lot of plastic there. If you'll take a look at these pictures, you'll see they're heavily attached, and I think the best approach here is to come in from the side. Don't come in vertically to the way these parts are attached, because you'll end up with more plastic than you want. Even coming in this way, you'll still end up with some plastic that you have to get rid of. It's unfortunate the way this is designed, because in some areas where these parts are joining together, it should be a nice clean line, and man, I really tried hard to get rid of some of this stuff, but in some areas they're still noticeable to me. You can see where that heavy attachment was, unfortunately. Next, opening up the holes. The instructions do suggest opening up these holes and tubes where these pins are sliding through. Highly recommend that you do that. If you do not open them up, you'll have trouble with joining the parts together, because there'll be some gaps for sure. No matter how hard you press them together, they just won't join as tightly as you want. So either open them up with maybe a Dremel on low speed, or as Lou Del Maso suggested in his build, you can cut the pins shorter so you don't have as much plastic to have to slide through those tubes. Next are attaching those small parts along the upper torso and head. These are the little parts that go around the ear and near the shoulder. They're really tiny little parts that slide into these little holes. Now the best approach here, I think, is to add in your adhesive, a little bit of that adhesive around the hole. If you're using super glue, for example, or super glue gel, that's what I did, rather than putting the super glue on the part itself and then trying to maneuver them into the hole that's provided there, because it for sure you'll end up touching the metallic finish, which can mess it up, and that's what I did before switching my approach here. So again, put a little adhesive in that opening, then slide in your piece. You'll find it's easier to do it that way. Assembling the legs separately like I did, I found helpful, particularly when you're dealing with that seam on that thigh piece. If you are going to fill that in, you'll have much better access if you just leave those legs separately. I did find it was helpful to snip the 2 little pins that slide into place at the top of the thigh. You can leave a little nub there so that it can help guide you into those little holes, but it wasn't a big deal to do that. You don't have to worry about it staying secure, because there's plenty of surface area to add your adhesive there. Now, one other quick word about seams. If you recall, when I put the two inner halves of the body together, I mentioned I wasn't going to do anything to fill any seams there because I was confident all of those would be covered, and that is true except for one tiny exception. That's about right here on the model where the face and the neck pieces on the exterior come together. There is a gap there that you can see the inner body, and if you look closely enough, this is something that probably just won't bug much of anybody except for you. You do see a tiny little area there where the seam peeks through. So if I were doing this again, I would fill that in and go from the top of the ear down to mid-neck or maybe the base of the neck just to make sure you're covered. And that way when you look at that part of the model, there'll be no seam to bug you. And one other important point, just to reiterate what I did with the paint now, I did start off with an 80-20 mix of the liquid silver and liquid gold color. This is the green gold now. And I think that looked okay, but if you look back to the video, you'll see it looks more silver than anything else, so I wanted it to look a little warmer as I indicated. But rather than spraying on just the pure liquid gold, I think that would be way overkill. It worked out well to, I thought it was a good decision anyway, to mix in more gold into the base color and approach it that way. And I think I ended up with a color that I'm very, very happy with. I tried as best I could with the photos to get the white balance right so it could give you a good representation. Not quite 100% of what it looks like in person, but very happy with it as I look at it here with the color, and I think you'd be happy with it as well. Well, it is getting close to the end of November 2022. That means my favorite holiday is coming up next week. Thanksgiving is just around the corner. So I'd like to take a second just to extend my best wishes to you and your families. Have a happy Thanksgiving. There are a lot of things for all of us to be thankful for. I am particularly thankful for you guys. Thank you very much for all of the support you've shown me, not only this year, but through all the years I've been on YouTube. All right, well, let me go ahead and end the video here in the same way I started.